Well, hello from a remote location in Denver, Colorado. And this week's patrons video is on Roman citizenship. Now, I don't have a lot really to say here that we haven't already said as we've gone through the chapters of Acts, but I thought it might be a good time to kind of summarize what we've learned from Acts. I mean, frankly, the book of Acts, we can infer from the book of Acts most of the relevant things about Roman citizenship. So, for example, on a couple of occasions in the book of Acts, we've learned that if you're a Roman citizen, you have a get out of beating free card, at least until after your trial. Seems like there's something like innocent till proven guilty when it comes to Roman citizens. So, for example, at Philippi, remember this? Paul said to the officers, they beat us publicly without a trial, even though we're Roman citizens, and they threw us into prison. And now they want to come get rid of us quietly? I don't think so. Let them come and escort us out themselves. And so this idea that as Roman citizens, Paul and Silas should not have been beaten and thrown into jail without, well, maybe thrown into jail, but they should not have been beaten without some kind of a trial first. So this is nice. From this point on, Paul pretty much tells them up front that he's a Roman citizenship. For example, in Jerusalem here, the commander, the Chiliarch, ordered that Paul be taken into the barracks, be flogged, interrogated, to find out why people were shouting at him. And as they stretched him out to flog him, Paul said to the centurion, "Now, is it legal for you to flog a Roman citizen who hasn't even been found guilty?" And so this idea that you can't just beat a Roman citizenship, Roman citizen, unless there's been some sort of a trial, or you get in big trouble. And so this is clearly a good benefit because you can see that if you're not a Roman citizen, they can beat you and it doesn't matter. You know, let's say you're from Indiana and you happen to be traveling in Rome in the ancient world because you have a time machine. You know, they can just beat you or frankly, pretty much kill you, I guess. I mean, maybe not technically kill you, but it could happen. And so this is a great benefit of being a Roman citizen. They just can't just kill you. Of course, this is probably, according to tradition, Peter was crucified, but Paul was beheaded. Why was Paul beheaded? Because it's a more merciful execution. If they get it in one chop, it's fairly painless, I would assume, although I've never experienced it. I got better. Where crucifixion is a very painful death that takes hours and hours and hours and hours and hours for you to basically suffocate in your own fluids. Sorry, I shouldn't have said that. But so the Roman citizen doesn't get beaten. It is interesting that in 2 Corinthians, Paul talks about being beaten with rods 5 times, isn't it? 4 times? A number of times. So that's a curious thing. Because we know it happens at Philippi, but we don't know of it happening before there. Curious. Anyway, let's move on. So how to become a Roman citizen? We have this little back and forth between Paul and the Chiliarch in Acts 22. The commander said, "You're a Roman citizen? I had to pay a lot of money for my citizenship." This is probably talking about a bribe. He probably, of course it was expected, or allowed. Looks like this commander, kind of bribed some lower official to give him his citizenship. Who knows? Maybe Felix. But I was born a Roman citizen, Paul replied. Another way to become a citizen. So those who were about to interrogate him withdrew immediately. And the commander himself was alarmed when he realized that he'd even put Paul into chains without a trial. Okay. Of course, we realize from Acts chapter 25 that one of the benefits of being a Roman citizen is that you can kind of get out of the jurisdiction of a local official. So Paul uses his citizenship as a way to get out of being tried by Felix. I'm now standing before Caesar's court where I ought to be tried. I appeal to Caesar. After Festus conferred, he declared, "Well, you've appealed to Caesar? To Caesar you'll go." Now, of course, I had somebody kind of point out to me that this doesn't necessarily mean that Paul appeared before Nero himself. I've just always assumed that Paul appeared before Nero himself, and maybe he did. But it is, I guess, also possible that Paul simply had his case transferred to Rome, where he appeared before some other official, maybe not Nero himself. I hadn't realized that until very recently, that that was a possibility. I've always just assumed that he appeared before Nero. But standing to Caesar's court doesn't necessarily mean standing before Caesar himself, I assume. Okay, so now these last two slides, let's sum up and maybe add a few more to what we've been able to infer an awful lot just from the book of Acts itself. But now let's fill it in with some details from other places. And by the way, I'm following Everett Ferguson backgrounds of Christianity here in these lists. So you could be a Roman citizen by being born into a family that had Roman citizenship. This is how Acts claims that Paul got his Roman citizenship. Now, you could do some special service to the empire and be granted citizenship this way. So, assuming that Paul was born a Roman citizen, we can infer that probably his grandfather helped out one or another of the Romans running through Cilicia back in the day. So, Julius Caesar, Augustus Caesar, Octavian that is, Mark Antony, Gnaeus Pompeius, one of those you would assume gave Paul's grandfather or great-grandfather his citizenship, maybe for help making tents or making leather goods or making something, booties. Okay, under Claudius, the Roman Emperor Claudius, apparently Romans complained about Claudius just indiscriminately giving out citizenships. Now, it may not be the case that Claudius was indiscriminate, but certainly those who are already citizens didn't like, maybe a little bit like immigration today, where people aren't real happy about, a lot of people aren't happy about the idea of, amnesty, they call it, giving citizenship to people who came here to the United States illegally. Well, anyway, maybe slightly different, but Claudius gave out Roman citizenships quite freely, and it made upset, the people who had been citizens already. They felt like it cheapened their citizenship for these others to be given their citizen. So, and also under Claudius, apparently you could more easily bribe a subordinate to get your citizenship. And perhaps this is what Claudius Lysias did. Perhaps he bribed Felix or some other person in order to become a citizen. Now, some other things that aren't in the New Testament, if you were the slave of a citizen in Rome and were given your freedom, your manumission, that made you a Roman citizen as well. So that doesn't apply to anybody in the New Testament that we know of. And then, of course, if you did military service and were discharged, you could get Roman citizenship that way. But again, we don't know of anybody in the New Testament that falls into that category. So here are ways to become a Roman citizen. What were the privileges? Well, we've mentioned some of them. Here's one that we haven't mentioned because it doesn't seem particularly relevant to the New Testament. But if you were in Rome, you could vote on things. Now, mind you, a lot of it seemed to be rigged. The emperor basically was the emperor. So they may have had votes, but, the emperor wanted it, the emperor had it. But we've seen this freedom from degrading forms of punishment. We've seen that. And, of course, we've seen the right to appeal to Rome for trial. So those are the basic privileges of a Roman citizen. And, of course, if you're a person like Paul, the ability to get out of degrading forms of punishment is a nice one to have in your back pocket. Well, this has been a little bit of a review of what some of the benefits of being a Roman citizen, especially as it relates to the New Testament.